Hello, welcome to Very IT. My name is Prabdeep Singh Mann and I'm the founder and lead instructor at Very IT. Now in this session, we're going to cover 10 different topics. Firstly, we're going to be starting around the service commandlet. We'll then move over to the stop and start commandlet, the get and set commandlet, the get help commandlet. We'll also be looking at the disable and enable commandlets, as well as what are modules, what are the pipelines, copying and pasting, as well as outfile, and lastly, format data. If you can do a great favor by hitting that like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, that'd be greatly appreciated. Here, we'll be looking at the get service commandlet. So here we're going to launch the services. Now services is within the Windows operating system. We're currently using Windows 11. Now in order to do so, you'll need to click on the start button on the bottom and search for services. This in turn will launch the services dialog box over here. Now as you can see, it has a list of different services that are running within the operating system. They can include things such as your network connection, your optimized drives, etc. And the one that we're going to be using within the example is going to be the print spooler, which is going to be this one over here. Now how structured it is on the top, we've got a list of the exercise that we're going to run through, as well as the output below. So what we're going to do is just clear this. So to do that, we're going to do CLS, which is to clear the screen. Now the first command that we're going to be running is the get-service. Now the good thing within PowerShell is it uses IntelliSense, which will guess as to what it is, will suggest an appropriate one. Now when you do locate it, you can just press a tab and that will select the one that you desire. And then you can just press enter to then provide the respective output. And this commandlet will generate an output and it will have outlining what the status is, what the name of the service is, and the display name of it. Now, before we continue to the next commandlet, we'll just run through this important section over here. Now, you've got the commandlet, and it will generally have a parameter and a value. Now, they have different meanings. So the commandlet essentially will just do one thing only. It won't do two, just one thing. The parameter will basically be a property of a commandlet and will generally have a dash behind it. And the value is the property name in the parameter that belongs to a commandlet. I'll explain what that means now with this example. So for instance, as you can see over here, we have get-service at the very top. That is what we call the commandlet. That's the thing that will only do one thing. The parameter is going to essentially be the name of this entire column. So you've got the status, you've got the name, you've got the display name. So this thing here would essentially be called the parameter. And the value is going to essentially be the property name within that parameter. So for example, that would be Spooler in this instance over here. So this one over here is what we will make reference to as the value. So taking this format, the commandlet is get-service. The parameter is the name, this one over here, and the value is a spooler. And the spooler which you mentioned is this value over here. Now, as you can see in this example, when we ran the script, it provided the entire output. But if we want to be able to filter it down specifically to spooler, what we would do then is to run the following script, which is get-service, where the name is going to be spooler, and it'll auto detect it as well. When we press enter, you can see now it provides an output of the service that's currently running, namely Spooler. Now, there are different ways that you can write this. You can also use the inverted commas, and I'll explain why you need to do that as well. So what we could do, press the up cursor to save you having to type it again. Now, what we can do is if we put inverted commas for Spooler and press enter, you'll notice it will also still provide the same output. I'll explain why that's important in a moment. But essentially what this is going to do is obtains the service Spooler, and you can see that it's currently running as over here. And it also does retrieve information and has an output. Now, not every single commandlet will provide an output, which we'll run through in a moment as well after this later. Now, you can also use this. In this example over here, we were using this column, the name column. Now, if you were going to do the display name, we'd have to modify it ever so slightly. So instead of using name, we would use display name. And instead of using Spooler, we would use print Spooler. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So we've got the get-service, which is fine. The display name is going to be this one at the very top in the column. However, instead of us using Spooler, which was over and locate it, bear with me for a moment. Over here, we're going to be using print Spooler instead. Now, it's going to write this script now, this one over here, but I'm going to explain why this is not appropriate in a moment. If I was to do the get-service again, where the display name is print Spooler, you'll see it auto detects the commas on there. You can see in the early one, we didn't use it. Now here, we're not going to have the inverted commas, but I'm going to show you it's not going to work. Now, this won't work because this is what we call a string. Now, if there's spaces in between our value, then you definitely need to have inverted commas on here. So what we need to do is have these inverted commas over here. Now you can see it does operate. The quotes are basically needed around the string because it has values in the space. Got space within the actual value over here. If there was no space, then you don't necessarily have to use it, but good practice is just to have the quotes at all time. Just a few tips as well. So tab will essentially allow you to auto-populate it. So when you are searching for anything, such as get-service, you use the tab key. Also, you'll need quotes around the string, as mentioned before. Essentially anything with a space in between that value. And also, if you are looking to save time, you can use the down cursor key to be able to toggle on your recently compiled scripts. Here, we'll be looking at the stop service and the start service commandlet. Now, as before, we had a list of services. In order to launch your services, you would go to the start button and search for services. And as before, we have a list of services outlined over here. Now what we'll need to do is, as before, we're going to make a list of services and just output them to see which ones are running at present. In order to do so, we're just going to run the command get-service, press the tab button, and this will make a list of all the services that are currently running within our local machine. Now what we'll need to do is try to stop a service, but we need to select one. In this scenario here, we're going to be selecting the print Spooler. Now what we're going to do is run the command stop-service. However, the parameter is going to be the display name. So we're going to be selecting this column over here. And then within here, we're going to select the print Spooler. Now it's in alphabetical order. So if we follow the Spooler, which is one over here, we'll be selecting print Spooler under the display name. So in order to do so, we're going to be running stop dash service. The display name is going to be the print spooler. And as before, we're going to be using the quotes mainly because this is what's going to have a string, so we'll need to use that. Once we do so, you'll find that it won't generate an output. However, it is running in the background, and we can confirm so by running the get-service again. And upon doing that, this will generate an updated output on our services. So if we were to navigate back to our spooler, we can see that it's currently stopped. Now, in order to start that up again, what we'll need to do is run the second command over here, which, as you guessed, instead of it being stop, it's now start. So if we go to start dash service, where the display name is going to be the print spooler, you can see again it's ran, but it hasn't generated an output. So we're going to just double check that by going back to our get-service to see what the latest output is for our services. We go back to get-service and we navigate back over to print spooler. You can now see it's running. Here we'll be looking at the Get-LocalUser and Set-Localuser commandlet. So what we're going to do is have a list of users within our Windows operating system. So if I was to look at this one, you can see a number of different local user accounts on here. Now what we're going to do is run a command to obtain a list of all the local users on this Windows device. In order to do so, we're going to run this command over here, which is the get-localUsers. So if I run that, -localUsers, this will now outline a number of different users on this Windows device. Now, if I wanted to retrieve a specific one from this entire list, I'll have to run a second commandlet. Now, if you're not sure which one to run, your friend is Google. So what we're going to do is just run through a couple of those right now. So if you want to essentially get the local users in PowerShell, you'll have to search for that. And thereby in turn, it would go on to the Microsoft website, learn.microsoft.com at the time of this recording. And it'll explain what your commandlet is, namely the get-localUser, followed by the parameter, which is the name, and then the string, which is going to be your value. So in this example over here, that's what we mentioned, which is the get-localUser. The parameter is going to be the name, which is this one over here. And then the value, which is a string, is going to be my name over here, for example. It will be different on your machine, depending on what that local user is on your device. So if I was to run that now to filter this output to my desired one, which is going to be namely Prabdeep Mann without the space, all I have to do is run the get-localUser. Whereby the name is going to be Prabdeep Mann. And as you can see, it will now output a list of local users specifically just with my name Prabdeep Mann. Now, as you can see, that description is set to description 4. So if I wanted to update the description, what you'll need to do is go back to Google and search a command on how to do that. So if you are going to essentially get Get will essentially retrieve your output. However, if you want to set a description, then you need to run a set commandlet. And as you can see on Google, it does mention it over here as well, where you can set the description as outlined over here. So it explains if you set the local user to the name, for example, that name is going to be admin7, then change that description to the description of this account. So as in this example over here, follow the same kind of layout where we have set-local-user, which I've done over here. The actual name of it is going to be my Prabdeep Mann. And then the description is going to essentially be this string over here. So for example, if I were to run this command now, it will be set-local-user, where name is going to be Prabdeep Mann. So I'm filtering for that. However, I want to also update the description to, I'm going to set it to description 1. And as this is a string, we need to use quotes around this as well. Yep. So if I was to run this now, as mentioned with set, it doesn't provide an output. So I'll need to verify the output via the get-local-user. So if I was to run this now. And as you can see, where it was originally a description 4, now updated to description 1. If I now want to update that again, rather than me typing, I'm just going to use my up cursor, and I'm going to change that to number 2. And then I'm going to use my up arrow key again, and I'm going to go to get-local-user. And again, it will have updated it from where it was originally description 1. I prompted it to be changed to description 2, and if we look at the output, it's now description 2. Here, we'll be looking at the get help commandlet. Now, there are a lot of commandlets to run through, and quite often you are going to be needing help. Now, while you can search for it within the Microsoft website, you do have the get-help commandlet, whereby you can run help articles as well as resources locally within your PowerShell. Now, in order to do so, we're going to run through the first commandlet, which is a get-help. This will essentially install all the help modules within PowerShell IAC, and the commandlets are part of a module, and the module is updated on the Windows machine locally. So as I run this, we're going to see in real time this being installed. So if we do the get-help and press enter, it does prompt us the update-help commandlet downloads the most current help files for Windows PowerShell modules and install them on your computer. For more information about the update-help commandlet, see the Microsoft website essentially as per the link over here. So what we're going to do is select yes, and it will initiate the download in a moment. And as you can see, it's starting to update as accordingly. Now, as you can see, the get-help has updated all the modules, and each of the modules will have a respective commandlets associated with them. So if I was to now run the get-help again, this will now in turn provide a list of all the help that you can get within Windows PowerShell ISC. Now, if I wanted to actually get a little bit more help about a specific commandlet, what I can do is run the second commandlet over here, which is get-help, whereby the name, namely the parameter, is going to be, let's say we're going to use the one from earlier, which is get-service, which is the value. Now, if we were to look at the output of this, what you can see is it contains a number of different things. Obviously the name, it also contains the synopsis, essentially as to what it does. The syntax is around how to essentially use it. We won't go into too much detail at this stage, we'll be covering that at some point later. Also the description, more detail on the actual commandlet within that specific module that we just downloaded from the Get-Help, as well as related links, which are web links related to the Get-service. You also have remarks as well, where you can look at certain examples associated with it. So moving to our last one, we'll also follow up on the examples and the context of which you use this commandlet. So for example, if I were to repeat the above, Get-Help, where the parameter, the name, is going to have a value of Get-service, and we want to see supporting examples of it. This will now in turn provide supporting examples of which you can use to Get-services. And you can read through them in your own time. However, I personally prefer the one off the Microsoft website. However, you can choose to use this one as well over here. Here, we'll be looking at the Disable-LocalUser and Enable-LocalUser commandlet. So for local users, what we'll need to do is go to our File Explorer and obtain a list of the local users. So you can normally do that by launching File Explorer and searching for your C drive with the list of users over here. Now, as you can see, here's a list of them right now. So what we're going to do is obtain a list of our local users as shown on File Explorer. To do so, we're going to run the first commandlet, which is at the very top over here, is Get-LocalUser. And when we run that, you can now see that there are a list of all the respective local users on my machine. Now, if you're not too sure how you go about disabling and enabling the local users, the best practice is to go onto Google Chrome and obtain that from here. So as you can see, I've searched for disabling local users as well as enabling local users within PowerShell. And as you can see from disabling it, mentions how to go about running that script. And also for enabling, it does explain how to enable it as well. So if I were to go back over here and search for how we go about disabling the local user, we're going to run the second script, which is to disable the local user, where the name is going to be guest. As before, we're going to use commandlet disable local user. The parameter is going to be name, and the value is going to be guest. Here, if I were to run that, it won't generate an output, so I'll need to verify it by looking at the Get-LocalUser again. And if I were to run that, where you can see originally the guest was enabled, you can now see it's no longer enabled because it's now set to false instead of true. Now, if I want to enable it, I'll have to repeat the same process as here, but I'm just going to replace disabled with enabled. Now, if I were to do that, I'll just run the following script, enable-LocalUser, whereby the name is going to be guest. Once I run that, it won't generate an output as before, so I'm just going to look for Get-LocalUser. Instead of me running this where it's going to generate a larger object, I'm going to filter down that object. To do so, we're just going to simply use the parameter of name as per here, and we're going to search for the value of guest. And as you can see, it does show that it has been enabled. Here, we'll be looking at modules and commandlets. Now, commandlets are found within modules. Look at the Get Service commandlet. It's basically part of the Microsoft PowerShell Management module. Now, each module will have their own series of commandlets, and you can identify which module to install. So for instance, if I look at the get dash command, this will list all the commandlets on our system. So if I was to run this right now, now over here, scroll to the top, this will essentially show every single commandlet that's within our Windows PowerShell ISE. However, it doesn't explain which commandlet belongs to a specific module. So for instance, if I was to look at the stop service within Google, this will essentially show that it belongs to the Microsoft PowerShell management. If I were to actually look at this module, this will outline every single commandlet that is part of this module. So this is essentially the module, and all these ones over here are all the commandlets within that specific module. So for instance, we know that the stop dash service is part of the stop dash service commandlet is part of the Microsoft PowerShell management module. And you can identify it by running this command over here as well. So if I were to go, and run this script, which is get dash command, whereby parameter is name, and we're going to be searching for the value of stop service. As you can see over here, it is part of the Microsoft PowerShell management module. Here, we'll be looking at pipelines. So a pipeline is what allows you to carry out bulk operations. The good thing is that you can retrieve an output, feed that output as part of an input into another commandlet. Run through an example right now. So for instance, if we were to go back to our original example, which is where we get our service, you can see it returns a number of services that are running on within our Windows machine. Now, if I wanted to filter this object down to the Spooler, what I would do is go to get-service, whereby again our parameter would be the value Spooler, and you can see the objects filtered down. If I now want to in turn stop that service, as before, I would do the stop dash service commandlet, where the parameter is going to be name, and we're going to go back to Spooler. Again, it won't necessarily return anything from here, and I can review it simply by repeating this one above over here. And you can see that it has now stopped. If I want to start it as before, all I would do is repeat the above. I'm just going to change it to start. And again, if I want to check the status of it, I will just repeat the get dash service with the name Spooler. And you can see that it's now back to running. Now, as you can see, there's quite a few different commands over here. And the great thing is, when you use pipeline, you can essentially use the output from the get dash service and then feed it into the start service after. So that's what this part's making reference to. So for instance, if I was going to go back to the get dash service commandlet, the parameter is going to be name, going to use Spooler. However, we're going to use this, what we call the pipeline. Now this will generate an output as before in the object, but we're going to instead feed that into our start dash service. Now it's intelligent enough without you having to specify the name Spooler again, because it knows it from this output from earlier. So if I were now to start dash service, now see it won't necessarily generate the output, but I can in turn check it out from here, and you can see that it should be running. That's fine as requested. Now, if I was going to stop it, I would essentially do the same thing again, where I'm doing my get dash service, where again our parameter is going to be name, going to be Spooler for our value. And we're going to use our pipeline. We're going to feed it into our stop service. And again, if I want to review the output of it, you can now see it stopped as well. So essentially what this will do is generate an output from the get dash service, and then we're going to feed that into as an input for our start dash service or our stop dash service. In this example, we're going to be looking at the get local user again, but this time we're going to update the description and pipe that into it. So I'm just going to run through that now. So if we do our get local user as before, this will return a number of local users within our Windows local machine. And as you can see, here is a list of them right now. If in turn I want to update the description of the guest account, namely this one over here, then what I'll need to do is I'm going to update the description of this Prabdeep Mann one over here. So in order to do so, we're going to set local user as before for our commandlet. We're then going to be using our parameter of name. That's going to be followed by the value of Prabdeep Mann without the space. And to put our quotes around that, and we're going to be using our description, where we'll change it to description 3, and it's currently description 2 at the moment. Put quotes around that because it's a string. When we do so, it's not going to generate an output, so we'll have to confirm that by going to get local user. And as you can see, the description changed from description 2 to description 3. Now, as you can see, that required a couple of lines over here. And the great thing is you can update it by using the pipeline. So as before, we're going to use this one over here this time. So we're going to get the local user and retrieve that. But as that generates an output, we're now going to set that local user to the description 4. So in order to do so, what we're going to do is run this command line. So it's going to be get dash local user, the commandlet. The name is going to be Prabdeep Mann, and this will in turn generate an output, which we're going to use the pipeline and feed that into our set dash local user, which is what we use to actually update the description from before. And this time we don't need to search for the name or essentially the parameter and the value of Prabdeep Mann because it obviously knows that from before prior to that pipeline. So it's going to set the local user and we're going to just use the description. And we'll update that to description 4. And if we were to now look at get local user, it should hopefully have updated from description 3 to description 4. And that has happened as requested. So that's essentially how you would pipe the get local user into set local user, because the get local user will generate an output which you can then feed into set local user. If this was the other way around, you wouldn't be able to do it because the set local user doesn't generate an output, which you then can't in turn feed into the get local user via the pipeline. Get local user will have an output which you can feed in via the pipeline into set. Here we're going to be looking at copying and pasting files between different folders. Now, one of the things we'd recommend is for you to navigate to Google Chrome and to search for the respective commandlets. If we were to go over to here, there is one for Get-Item, and there's also one for Copying-Item. And they do highlight how you go about compiling that script. Namely, you'd use the commandlet Get-Item followed by the parameter of the path and the value of the file that you're trying to locate or move. That's also applicable to when you are copying it as well. So following that, we're going to now run through the script. So firstly, before I continue, we're going to go to my file explorer and we're going to essentially look at the respective folders. So just bear me for a moment while I get that for you. If I were to go over here, you can see that there is a start folder. That in turn has 6 different respective files, namely an A for the cmp, doc, and txt, and a B file as well. So what we're going to essentially do is get those respective files, and then we want to in turn paste them into, or paste a file within the finish folder. Now the finish folder doesn't have anything. Yep. So what we're going to now do is confirm that we have the file called A within the start folder. Namely, we do have this file here, and it should return and confirm that that is the case. So I'm going to run the first script, which is to get-item, whereby the path we know is on the C drive, and that it's in the folder, the start folder, whereby the file is T, an A file. And as you can see, it does return an output to say that yes, that is the case as expected. Now we can copy the file over and paste it into the finish folder, and we're going to run the above script over here. So that's going to be copy-item as our commandlet. We're going to be using the parameter of path with the value of folder where that file is located. And then we're going to paste it into a destination folder. You don't need to use the path as specified here earlier, because it's intelligent enough to understand it. Now, if I were to go over back into my file explorer, this should in turn have pasted the A-text file into the finish folder. So if I can now go to the finish folder over here, you can now see that it has appeared over there as expected. Now, if we want to confirm that that's the case via PowerShell, what we would do is run the second script, which is to get the item, going to go to the path parameter, and we use the value of where we know it is. The finish folder, you'd expect that it be a file, which is a txt file. And you can see that it's there as expected. Now, as expected from earlier, when we did actually search for this, it does generate an output to say, yes, that is where the file is located. And as that generates an output, you can use that as part of the pipeline to paste it to the destination folder of the finish folder. So what I'm going to do is just remove that for a moment. If I were to go back into here and run the following script, which is get-item, we know that the path is originally the C start and that it is a text file called A. We know that this will generate the output and that we're going to pipe that output and copy into the copy-item. And we know that that normally will go to a destination. And we want that destination to be the C folder. And it's going to go to a folder called finish. Properly. So now if I were to go back over here, you now see, as expected, the file has been transferred from the start folder to the finish folder. Here we'll be looking at copying and pasting files. So earlier we covered how we copy paste one file from between different folders. However, in this example, we're going to be looking at how we copy and paste multiple files from one folder to another folder. Namely, we're going to be copying all the files. So as before, we had a number of respective files within the folder. So if we look at the start one, see that it had 6 files. If we go to the finish one from earlier, we had that original one. I'm just going to remove that for a moment. And the idea is we're going to be copying all the files from here and we're going to paste it into the finish folder over here. Now, one of the things we'd recommend is to go into Google and search for how to do so. There is the actual commandlet get-ChildItem, and it explains it over here as well. But essentially, we're going to be running the commandlet get-ChildItem with the parameter of the path and the string being the value of it. So here we're going to firstly retrieve all the files in the C start folder. So we're going to run this script over here, which is get-ChildItem, whereby path is going to be on C drive in the start folder. And when we do that, this will in turn generate the 6 files as earlier, which is this one here, as expected. And now what we want to do is be able to copy a file, namely the txt file, namely A, and put it into the finish folder. So I'm just going to just run through that one more time. So when you do that, we're going to run the second script, which is copy-item, whereby we understand that the parameter is the path, value is going to be file is located, namely in the C start folder, a text file, and it's going to a destination. It's going to belong to finish folder in the C drive. So as before, if we go back into here and go to our C drive and finish folder, it will be over there. I'm going to remove that one more time as well. And as mentioned, we're going to be transferring all the files from the start folder and move it into the finish folder. Now we're going to run this one over here, is to get the child item again, and going to go to that path of the C drive, go to the start folder, and in turn that will generate an output, and we're going to copy that item to be piped from before. And that's going to in turn go to the destination folder of the finish. So now if we were to go over here, we can see that all the respective files from start folder here now transferred over to the finish folder over there. Yeah, we'll look at outfile commandlet. Here we're going to be outputting the service's user accounts into a text file. Now here we'd recommend using the commandlet out-file, and you can find it from the Microsoft website simply by searching for it. It mentions it over here, whereby you have the commandlet out-file with the parameter of the file path and the value being the string. So this example over here, we're going to obtain a list of all the services running on the local machine. As per earlier, it was the get-service. However, if you want to use that and transfer that into a text file as part of the output, what we're going to do is repeat that as before, the get-service. However, what we are going to do is pipe that and use it into our commandlet out-file, whereby we're going to be using the file path of the, and before I continue, I also do have a folder on the C drive called lab. We're just going to remove those ones there. So it's on the C drive, it's called lab, and we're going to call it user accounts.txt. And if I were to now in turn go over here and open it, now in turn see that's generated a list of all the services in a txt file as expected. Okay, the second one is to get a list of all the local users. So as before, which we've ran before, is to get -localUsers. Sorry about typo. This will now in turn generate a list of all the local users that are within the Windows machine that I'm currently working on. And now I can use that out and pipe that into the output out-file commandlet and save it to the lab folder which I created. So again, run this script over here. Get-LocalUser, whereby I'm going to use out-file commandlet. That's going to go to a file path to the lab folder, which will in turn have a file which we'll create called user account text. And now if we were to go over to our lab folder, you can now see that has generated a number of these user account files over here as well. User account within the text file. So essentially this will retrieve a list of users in a text file format and saves it to the folder. Yeah, we're going to be looking at formatting data within PowerShell. Now, if we were to go to our Get-LocalUser, this will generally in turn provide an object in a tabular format. However, if we want to format that data within a list, we'd recommend to go over to Google Chrome to actually search for it. The one in question is basically going to be format-list within PowerShell. And it mentions that it formats the output as a list of properties in which each property appears on a new line. So if we were to actually get the output and pipe it into format list, we'll generate the following. So go back to Get-LocalUser and pipe that into the format list. You now see that it will repeat it, however, in a list format. It also does have a few extra properties within the output as well. That being said, we can also now given that that has an output, we can also use that and pipe it into another commandlet. Namely, we're going to generate a file and put that within the lab folder on the C drive. So what we're going to do is, again, repeat Get-LocalUser, and we're going to format that list. But this time, from earlier, we're going to use the out file, and we're going to generate that text file and submit it within the C drive on the lab folder. I'm going to call it user account. Call it 2 as we had one from earlier. So just check spelling over there, format-list. And if we now in turn go back to our file explorer onto the lab folder, this one, you can now see that we've created a text file called accounts2. And again, it's this time going to be in a list format as requested. Here, we'll look at the format list commandlet. Here, we're going to be looking at formatting data within PowerShell. Now, if we were to go to our Get-LocalUser, this will generally in turn provide an object in a tabular format. However, if we want to format that data within a list, we'd recommend to go over to Google Chrome to actually search for it. The one in question is basically going to be format-list within PowerShell. And it mentions that it formats the output as a list of properties in which each property appears on a new line. So if we were to actually get the output and pipe it into format list, we'll generate the following. So go back to Get-LocalUser and pipe that into the format list. You now see that it will repeat it, however, in a list format. It also does have a few extra properties within the output as well. That being said, we can also now given that that has an output, we can also use that and pipe it into another commandlet. Namely, we're going to generate a file and put that within the lab folder on the C drive. So what we're going to do is, again, repeat Get-LocalUser, and we're going to format that list. But this time, from earlier, we're going to use the out file, and we're going to generate that text file and submit it within the C drive on the lab folder. I'm going to call it user account. call it 2 as we had one from earlier. So just check spelling over there, format dash list. And if we would now in turn go back to our file explorer onto the lab folder, this one, you can now see that we've created a text file called accounts2. And again, it's this time going to be in a list format as requested.